repair necessary. They are jacking up the rents. I mean, and I'm talking Dutch Village, Sunset Gardens. I mean, complex after complex, okay? Thousands of units of affordable housing have been purchased by new investors in the last 24 months. Now, that's a tragedy, combined with, you know, the industry visitation taking over short-term rentals. So we only have about 84,000 units of housing in the county, and you're talking, you know, 5,000 units sucked up in these other things. So we really are seeing a tremendous crunch happening. So I want to take you through some other data just to show you some things that we've been looking at. I was on a call last night with some folks in the town of Rochester. They are thinking about putting together a committee. They in fact have put together a committee, I should say, to look at housing, affordable housing in Rochester, which is great. And they were talking about whether or not they're like, has anyone put together information on communities that are doing it right? And the truth of the matter is, yes. Anyone interested in this issue really might want to look at PACE Land Use Law Center. They have this tremendous gaining ground database that kind of summarizes a bunch of different housing, a bunch of different resources, and some of those resources are housing related. So you can search by topic, and I'll put all of this into an email and I'll send it to Lynn so she can send it around. But you can see, like, affordable housing is probably the #1 topic right now after comprehensive planning. Over at PACE, I just participated in a 6-week affordable housing zoning planning seminar over there. I'm an attorney with zoning and planning background, so that's an area that's really interesting to me. But I think all of us as people on the ground, as we start to work within our own communities, because zoning and planning is a home rule issue, we need to be asking questions about, like, is density appropriate? You know, I'll just give a perfect example. Rochester is who I was talking to last night. I mean, Kerhonkson, the hamlet of Kerhonkson could really take more density, right? And we need to think about things like exclusionary zoning, you know, 5-acre zoning, 2-acre zoning. Really? Do we really need that? Are there other ways to put boundaries on the kinds of development we want that doesn't require everyone to be rich? Okay, so I think that's something that we really need to think about. And accessory uses. I mean, you know, my mother lives in a little house next door, and that's an accessory use. I mean, so I think we really need to be, as people in our own communities, when our communities are looking at zoning and planning changes, comprehensive plan changes, zoning law changes, we need to be active in saying, like, hey, you know, there are ways to protect wetlands and open space without requiring everybody in town to be rich. So there is a great set of resources here, not just in statutes and proposed laws, but also training. And PACE is very reasonable in their pricing on the training. So sometimes it's free depending on your status, but I think everybody should take a look at it. They have an annual conference. It's coming up. I'm not sure when it is exactly, but it's definitely worth taking a look at. And then I have seen a lot of national conversations happening, webinars and stuff on housing. You know, yes, we are impacted because of COVID and the big push up from the city, short-term rentals, real estate investors. But the truth of the matter is, we have an affordable housing crisis nationwide. Right?
Hold on. Sorry, March. Can you guys just mute yourselves? I'm hearing some back.
Sorry. Yeah, I thought I was muted. Excuse me.
Sorry, March.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
So this is a nationwide issue. And, you know, I kind of had this experience when I was at the Community Foundation. We were doing a lot of food security work. And I realized it's not that there's a food desert. It's not that transportation is difficult to access. Every single problem that we're facing is a wealth inequity problem. Food security is a wealth inequity problem. Housing insecurity is a wealth inequity problem. And we have to start talking about that. And we have to call it out. And I know Indivisible has been very active in this area.
Be quiet.
Somebody is not muted.
I'm muting everybody.
Can you mute everybody, Lynn? Just because you may be having a problem.
Yeah, except that if I do that, I'm going to mute March as well. So I'm going to have to do it. Okay.
It's fine. We can push through. So I think that, you know, I wanted to let you guys know about some of these resources. And then I'm going to just take you through some of the work that we have done we issued our first ever popular annual financial report. This is something that's based on the consolidated annual financial report, which is 150 pages of like tables of just raw financial data from the county. Government Finance Officers Association and others sort of recommend that financial officials from public bodies try to translate that information into stuff that is more palatable for people to understand. We, in our work, this is on our website, I set aside a whole page for this housing crunch thing. I mean, this is a big deal. This is median residential home sale price. It has increased 28% in the last 5 years. That does not include 2020 data. 2020 monthly data is coming in, here's an example, consistently at least 20% over last year, and in some months more. So, the median sale price in November 2019 to November 2020, a 20% increase. That is on top of this 28% increase. So we are just looking at tremendous inflation in the home market. And I have to say, from where I sit, this does not look to me the same way that the housing bubble looked in 2006, 7, and 8. That was a different issue. That felt very speculative. It had to do with cheap and easy financing. It is not as easy to get financing these days. This is a result of changes in the market here, limiting of inventory. And you can in fact see that in the inventory numbers, the number of homes for sale month over month down almost 40% November to November. So inventory, number of months of inventory, 8.2 down to 4.2. I would recommend we put this data out monthly. If you want to keep up with us, please like or follow our page on Facebook. But this data is always drawn from the New York State Association of Realtors. They release market monthly data. I want to take you into Sullivan County. Do we have anybody here, or is this all Ulster people?
It's all Ulster.
It's all Ulster. The Sullivan data was unbelievable. It was a 70% median home sale price November to November. I need to show it to you just because I'm in such shock. I didn't post anything about it. I haven't published on it, but Sullivan County, 70.3% increase in median home sale price. That is unbelievable. That is shocking. And it could be an aberration of a few dozen properties that were high end, blah, blah, blah. But I think the message really is that it's really too expensive for people on the ground. And we need to start thinking about what we do about that. And again, like I said, I feel really strongly that home sale prices and lack of availability in the rental market really has to do with income inequality. I want to take you back to the Ulster County page for 1 second. I want to show you something. The Ulster County Planning Board does an annual rental survey. They ask primarily like well-known landlords that will respond for information. This report is kind of interesting. I asked them this year and they did it. I was really happy to break down the size of the unit, because these studio apartments, you can see this orange line, had actually shown a decrease, and it was kind of drawing down the numbers. And I was saying, like, until you stratify by a size, it's not really showing the clear picture for families in Ulster County. Because families need more than one room to live in, if at all possible, especially long-term. So anyway, I found that the planning part was very responsive to suggestions. I mean, I have a long history with them, but I urge you guys to look at it, and we should really be, since they're already going through this effort, we should be thinking about, how do we make this useful? By the way, here's census data by municipality, so you can look for your town in particular. So those are some of the resources I wanted to share. I mean, I think we have some good projects on the horizon, and we have some good things happening. I don't want to make it sound like nothing good is happening. I think the effort of the county to, and I can stop screen sharing now, I think. I don't know how I do. Okay, there we go. so we can see everybody. So the Golden Hill property, you know, seeing affordable housing development there, and even just seeing the county have on its agenda housing, which you have in the legislature, you have in the executive branch, it elevates the conversation, and that is a great thing because we really weren't talking about it. I mean, I sat for years in County Executive Hines' office, and Dennis Doyle, the director of planning, would say housing, and Mike Hein would say, shut up. So it was not being received, the message that this is a huge crisis at the time. And I myself am guilty of this. As the head of economic development, I would say to Dennis Doyle, housing was the most boring topic. I didn't want to talk about it because I was not graded on housing, right? My job was to create as many jobs as possible, and housing was not what I considered part of the mix for economic development. And that was wrong. You know, we need people to say like, hey, I've looked at this, I made a mistake, I was wrong. Housing is absolutely critical for economic development, and new companies don't even want to come if there's nowhere for their people to live or no houses for their people to buy. So I'm happy that we're having a conversation about it. I think people are coming to the place where they realize that RUPCO needs support, and you know, the development that RUPCO is doing and has done has been great work, right? I had on my post, probably, Lynn, you may have seen it, one of the neighbors to the Woodstock RUPCO project said her greatest regret in life is fighting the project. And I wrote back to her, and she's an amazing writer. And I said to her, would you please consider writing an essay on that? And she wound up in a good conversation with Kevin O'Connor. I think that's a really important thing, you know, for people to kind of recognize that, you know, affordable housing is not the scourge that we think it is. And I think we need to look at all possibilities. And that may mean building more public housing, investing more in public housing, affordable housing, tax credits, you know, every means necessary has to be looked at. So that's my bailiwick on housing. It's an income inequality problem. And, you know, after World War I, we taxed the hell out of people who had generated tremendous wealth from the military industrial work in World War I. And we need to do that on the digital economy. There's absolutely no reason we should have these digital billionaires raking in the profits while we have people working in Walmart and living in tents at Onteora Lake. It's not acceptable. Yeah. So I look forward to working with you guys on these issues going forward. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I will certainly send along sort of a snapshot of everything that I had taken you through. Thanks.
March, thank you. I feel it's like a drink from a fire hose. This is a great start. There are some questions that are stacking up, so I'm just going to call on you guys, right? So Jane had the first question. Oh, Jane, you have to unmute yourself.
I'll unmute myself. We in New Paltz have some structural issues. What we are seeing is pretty much, when we have 14, I noticed in your statistics, 14% of the housing units, rental units in the county. And we have approximately, what, 6,000, I think the statistics said, here in town. Half the town is rental. But these rentals are getting higher and higher. And one of the reasons is, and one of the reasons the housing prices are going up as well as the taxes going up is because of the school taxes. We have a school board that is spending private school level money per student for students here. On an average $300,000 house, we have approximately $9,000 of school taxes per, for someone. And there seems to be no way to control the school budget. And there are budget lines like $500,000 for the principal's office of a grammar school in the school budget. How can we bring school budgets, which are not overseen by, it seems like, anybody, into line to help push down these horrible costs?
Well, school budgets are not within my purview. They are audited regularly by the Office of State Comptroller. We haven't seen any school budget audits in Ulster County. I think I have not compared the cost per pupil in New Paltz to other parts of Ulster County, but I would say every single school district in Ulster County, you are seeing double-digit expenditures on each student. A lot of that is driven by pension and healthcare costs. I can tell you one thing you can do: get us universal healthcare or Healthy New York, because we need to change the way healthcare is funded. And frankly, you know, we entered into contractual obligations that require us to have certain pension costs that, you know, we're not going to undo right now. And I think rather than trashing that, we need to lift some of that up, because, you know, these public sector unions are some of our strongest unions, and unions have brought us so much. So I think you have to look at the whole picture. And I think you really have to look at some of these post-employment obligations that are really continuing to weigh on the district. If the district was not paying healthcare costs for some of its retirees, and I'm talking pre-Medicare, right? People who may retire in that window, that would be a whole different thing. And then I also think you're right that that executive pay in the districts, and really frankly at a lot of our nonprofits as well, is really out of alignment with what people in the communities can afford to pay. I'm sorry I can't offer more on that, but I do think changing the healthcare system would make a difference.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that, because the truth, the plain truth is your chart, which shows a 2-bedroom apartment for $1,400 on average in New Paltz, is in excess of $2,000 a month.
Yeah.
And as a senior citizen, I know for myself, it was not economically viable for me to purchase a modest, say a $250,000 house, because it would double my monthly costs as a renter. So people are, you know, renting is not paying the same level of taxes that homeowners are paying.
I disagree with that. I think that renters eat the cost of taxes because they're paying a higher rent. I have a rental on my property. When my taxes go up, I raise the rent. And I think that this brings up to me something that I'd love to say to the Indivisible group as a whole. We have this idea that taxpayers are landowners, and I think we need to move away from that. I think renters are taxpayers. People who pay sales tax are taxpayers. And it's not fair or appropriate to only consider landowners as taxpayers when these renters are burdened with taxes. New Paltz is a unique environment because of the college. And frankly, my opinion, we need more housing at the college. We should have done that years ago. That's a controversial position.
That's a controversial thing. Or we need the college to take a bigger share in the, I mean, they have a kind of a pretty much a free ride. They create costs for us. And I don't want to get in, you know, I don't want to take a left turn here, but we have significant issues here. There is no affordable housing in our town, and it's really awful, and everybody's complaining, and it's pushing out middle-class families that have lived here in some cases for many, many years. Okay, but it's really more the school side than anything else. That is the real mother load on the taxes.
Okay, thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Okay, Jeff. Oh, by the way, I just want to, since you mentioned the New York Health Act March, there is a growing coalition of the around the New York Health Act, and there's actually going to be a presentation teach-in on January 28th, which I'll talk about later. All right, so moving on to the next question, Jeff Collins, about Woodstock and a countywide approach.
I see your question, Jeff. I agree. We need both. We need a countywide approach, and we need town by town approaches. You know, the idea that certain municipalities just aren't going to play their part in affordable housing is bogus. And you saw Westchester County really fight this, where different towns were like, we don't want to have any part of it. And that's just really not acceptable. It's been litigated and it's not acceptable. So yeah, I think we need to have both. We probably need to redo the entire housing strategy for the county. That's going to take time. And in my opinion, we're in a housing crisis right now. So I don't, you know, we have a lot of people who don't have the time. We need something faster than that. I don't know what that looks like. I don't have a solution, but we need both. We need town by town, and we need a countywide solution. And that countywide solution, by the way, and I think actually, now that I think about it, the housing needs assessment that was done in the county housing wide strategy, I think named a number of units that each town should be developing. So I urge you to go back and look at that. And, you know, Woodstock's one of the few towns that actually set aside of an area, identified a place they wanted affordable housing, invited RUPCO to come in and make a bid on that property. And then of course it was fought tooth and nail. It finally got done. But I agree. Yes, we need both, and probably a statewide and a national plan as well. Because don't forget, a lot of our public housing was built with national dollars, federal dollars.
Mark, just to interject a question related to that, I understand that Pat Ryan had created a housing committee led by, I think, Evelyn Wright, to put together at least a survey on the housing situation here. Are you familiar with that? We're
I
just
don't
trying to
know.
get hold of exactly what that is, because I'm
I don't
actually at Rochester study group. All right. Okay, thanks. So next, can you see the questions, March? There's one, next one from Amy.
Yeah,
Right.
Can I
irresponsible
follow up on that
renters.
question?
I had this happen, Amy. I had a Section 8 tenant in the house I'm in now. It was a family of 7, because this is a 5-bedroom house. They absolutely trashed the living daylights out of this house. And some of it was just their lack of knowledge about certain things. Like, you know, she complained to me about the heat bill. I came over, they had the attic skylights wide open in the middle of winter, and it was just venting all of the heat out of the property. But I had like $35,000 in damage to the property when they left, and I was extremely disappointed. And I did feel like the Section 8 program really did not educate. There was, you know, it's funny because in affordable housing we have a lot of like homeowner education programs, like new homeowner, but renters need education too. You know, this family was coming from municipal water and sewer. They didn't understand how sensitive private septic is. They had never had to deal with an electric utility box in the basement. They shoved a wood chip in to keep a circuit breaker from flipping. I mean, you know, so there were just some basic fire, health, safety things that they didn't know about. And I wound up taking on that responsibility, but it would have been so much better. And I think the tenancy would have been better and our relationship would have been better if they had gotten support through the program. And by the way, they were not treated very well by their Section 8 advisor. It was really disturbing to me how dismissive and rude they were treated. So it wasn't even like my tenant had somebody to go to for questions. So you know, I think there needs to be tenant education, honestly, through the agencies that provide support. And because I don't think these people wanted to hurt the house. That was not their goal. They did not want to destroy or hurt things. A lot of it was accidental. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I love that idea of tenant education. But maybe that would be incentive for other private owners. I just think it's an absolutely ridiculous thing to put the burden of affordable housing on a landowner or a homeowner, because of the fact that it's so rarely on an individual basis a real money-making effort. And I of course the difference between you and me is I never raised the rent because the people couldn't afford it. So I just got burdened with more taxes and more repairs, and I didn't make any money. And then at one point I helped a woman who was in a place I had in Kingston. For something like a year and a half, we floated her. I advocated for her for family so that I could get rent. Finally, they stopped doing it, and she just was in our house, and we couldn't afford it. We were just 2 musicians, you know. So it was like Section 8 and the musicians, you know. And
Yeah.
so I am so for public affordable housing. I can't say it enough. I don't believe this should be on the backs of the private sector because it's not stable enough any which way, you know.
Well, if people were receiving a decent Section 8 allotment that was in line with the market rate here and tenant education, it wouldn't be the same thing. You know, it really would be a different thing. I mean, to me, it all goes back to wealth inequity, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and look, we're facing a serious K-shaped recovery right now. Some people are doing great coming out of this economy, this COVID economy. and some people are being left terribly, terribly behind.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we do need a lot more public sector investment, and I think it should come not only in the form of building new housing and managing new housing, but also providing subsidy and, you know, support for people to rent in the private sector. So it kind of needs to be both. But if those tenants had, you know, decent Section 8, you wouldn't be in that position. Yeah,
Right.
I agree. And really what it comes down to, right, because we're all taxpayers, right? So, and we, you know, are funding public spending, but we have a bunch of fat cats. They're getting way more than their share, so much more that we can't even like mentally wrap our mind around it. So that needs to change. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Okay, it's hard to read this chat. I'm gonna just skip.
Jackie has a question.
Yeah, sorry, Lynn, this is related to what March was saying. In my experience with people with mental health issues who had case managers who intervened with the landlord in Section 8, it's a model that really, really works. It obviously would take a lot to have it to a larger population. But if there are issues that the landlord has with a particular tenant in Section 8, then that case manager is the mediator and deals with it. I would think that would open up a lot more landlords, because what happened with those landlords, they were very happy with that arrangement and were willing to keep those rentals into Section 8. And I think that would open up Section 8 and landlords to provide Section 8 housing. So just as in addition, or maybe instead of tenant and education, a very specific person to help those people who need that help. And a lot of low income people don't have the experience to be able to deal with it.
Thank you. I'm gonna just jump over to Maxine. Are you still here? Oh, there you are. Okay. I'll just read it out. Is Habitat building any housing in the county, and is commercial property also rising at the same rate, or has COVID affected commercial?
So there is an Ulster County Habitat for Humanity, and they do build houses, and they've done terrific work. The Restore on 28 is one of their funding sources. So shop there if you can, volunteer with them if you can. They're not producing a volume of housing. And I think Orange County Habitat for Humanity has done, or maybe it's Newburgh, a tremendous amount of building. And so, you know, they can only do as much as they have in terms of support and volunteers, but yes, they are here and they are working. Yeah. And again, right now it's even more complicated, because how is something like Habitat supposed to manage volunteers in a construction project on the ground in COVID? And, you know, what kind of support is there for those types of organizations? Let me also say, you know, we have the Kingston City Land Bank. As the head of the Community Foundation, I was the funder for that initial wave of funding. And, you know, that has taken a very long time to get off the ground. I'm disappointed that it's taken so long. And there's been conversation at the county level whether or not we should ask them to expand, which I think is a mistake because they can't even manage what they've got. But, you know, land bank is, you know, definitely a tool. And to ask to the question, there was a couple questions on commercial. Yes, commercial properties have been increasing. And in fact, you know, those property values were going up way pre-COVID. You were seeing 1031 exchanges blowing the comps on like small little brick commercial buildings in Kingston as early as 2018. So yes, we've seen a tremendous increase in commercial property values in Ulster. Yes, commercial properties can make good residential locations. I mean, the lace mill factory is a perfect example. Steve Finkel, may he rest in peace, and I don't know if any of you know him, but he was the head of economic development for Kingston for many years. He drove me by that property and he said, March, this should be housing. I couldn't see it. It was a boarded up warehouse in like sitting on the railroad tracks. I thought he was crazy, but you know what? He was right. It's great housing. Things like the underwear factory, the shirt factory, you know, so yes, I think commercial definitely has potential. And we need to consider all options right now. Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, just stacking. I see there's Steve, there's Susan Jaworski, and there's Tom Denton, and Susan Denton. So we'll just take this to 11. What time is there? 11 o'clock? I'm in Hawaii.
No, it's
so
10 up. We can get through it.
we'll get through it. All right. So Steve, go next.
Is there a rent control ordinance for the county of Ulster, or maybe the city of Kingston, or anywhere in the area?
No.
No.
No,
Okay.
and there
So-
was a renter protection statute that was put in place statewide last year. And part of the decision on whether or not a municipality can implement has to do with vacancy rates within their boundaries. And, whether it was purposeful or not, there were delays in the responses by some of the commercial, very large rental owners. And Kingston did not meet the vacancy requirements, which a lot of us think is bullshit right now, by the way. And maybe that should be looked at again. But even that rental protection does not provide, quote, rent control the way New York City has it. So no, we do not have it.
Okay, well, that's not really what I'm talking about. I worked on rent control in Hoboken for a number of years. I was on the rent stabilization board, and I ran for city council there on housing issues, exactly like what we're talking about here. And perhaps it's time. We had a rent control ordinance that was established because there was a state declaration of a housing emergency. And you're talking about a housing emergency here. And I agree, maybe it's a time to, work towards creating a rent control ordinance for the entire county, which actually gives property owners a benefit. In Hoboken, the rent control ordinance mandated that a property owner had to be able to make 11% on his initial investment. Now, you can't find that anywhere, no matter, what stock market you're in. But, capital improvements, et cetera, all increase rent, and you get, a yearly rent increase. There are protections for tenants, there are protections for homeowners.
So, several counties outside of the city of New York do have some rent stabilization. It's on units of 6 or more. We don't have that many properties with units of 6 or more. And I would say, this is really the purview of the legislature, right? Is to look at that. And hopefully these housing committees will be, looking at some options. Yeah.
So do you think that's something that we should be working towards?
I certainly think you should be looking at speaking with those who have policy-making authority. You know what I mean? I don't. I'm really just reporting the numbers to you. And again, I haven't done enough research on, you're speaking about Hoboken. Hoboken has a lot of properties that are over a certain size of units. We don't have that in Ulster, and I don't know state law well enough on rent control and rent stabilization to know what would even apply in Ulster. Okay. I just know that it's 6 units or more, and we don't have that many properties like that. So yeah, I think it takes working with the county legislature and probably seeing additional changes at the state level. I feel that we're at that place where we're facing a housing crisis, but whether we meet specific criteria, I haven't looked at yet. Yeah.
Okay. And Steve, just to let you know, Lynn Archer is actually on that Rochester Housing Study Group.
Oh, she is, okay.
My Laura Petit is actually on the housing committee in the legislature, so we can certainly have them on in the coming weeks. All right, so the next, Susan Jaworski.
So March, thank you very much for this information, and I really look forward to the email that comes. I was just wondering, I'm going to be reaching out to many of our households as we do our neighbor to neighbor. And after listening to other towns and so forth, I just feel that we are going to get feedback of people in need. And I would love to know where to go for the immediate assistance of these people and families. And is there any place to direct them? Does the county direct them anywhere?
No, you'd have to direct them to Family of Woodstock and Rupco. And those are really not short-term solutions, and less people are going to accept emergency housing in one of the shelters or welfare motels. We really do not have sort of a great system. Although we have, competent partners working, diligently, it's really not sufficient.
All
No,
right, so I'll work with my supervisor, but family is probably our best bet. But I just feel that I'm going to get surprised by this. My callers are going to get surprised by this, and they're going to feel like they want to give someone the first step. Yep.
Family, I worked at family and dealt with housing a lot in the calls I got. And boy, all we could ever do is say, call RUPCO, call social services. And then the people would say they called RUPCO and social services and there was nothing. It's pretty sad. Yeah. And that was 2 years ago, since 2 years ago.
Okay, I just feel like it's going to happen a lot more this time. Okay, thank you for that.
Susan. All right. Then we have Tom and Susan Denton.
Hi. Look, mine is not a question. As you can see, it's a statement about racial inequities. And I'm sure the response is, of course, but maybe there's something, March, you can say something about how that could be brought into the process.
Absolutely. So Tom, I'm so glad you raised this. The Nassau County Comptroller did a racial equity study of Nassau County. We're going to be looking to duplicate that in 2021. And we've just put together our advisory board for that, which is, all Black and brown folks from the community. So I think getting the data and sharing that data, we definitely saw it pop out when we were putting together our popular annual financial report, that there are big disparities in certain areas, educational attainment, health indicators, income, it runs the gamut. And I think we've got to get that information out there in a way that's easily digestible for people. And in Nassau County, it affected philanthropy and government work significantly. So I'm hoping that, this will actually make some change. But you're absolutely right. There are even greater disparities for people of color, particularly on the housing side, and people face tremendous housing discrimination. I myself was raised in a family with Black siblings, and we experienced this firsthand. We had places that just would not rent to us at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with you, and I think it's a stain on our record. When I was at the foundation, I had a fellow. He's passed away now, but he had me come to his deathbed. He signed over 7 figures of stock to create a Black only scholarship fund. And the reason he did it, when I pushed him on why, was that as a young man, before he went into his regular profession, he worked in a bank, and he had families coming in who should have Black families coming in for home loans that should have qualified and didn't. And he carried it his whole life. And he basically made a reparations scholarship. I mean, I was dumbfounded. So this is something that we really have to take a hard look at, and we probably have to think about a reparations approach to building family equity, generational equity in the Black community.
Yes, good. Thank you. I'm surrendering my seat to Susan.
All right, good.
Hi, I wasn't expecting to be in on this. I'm in my nightgown. March, I wonder if you know how much county funding goes towards housing people in welfare motels.
I saw your question on that. I don't have an exact number, but I do know that it is so expensive. The per night is unbelievably high. Some of that, by the way, is state money. So it's not just county taxpayer dollars, but in working with Krista Hines across the river in Dutchess County and Sabrina Marzuka, the head of DSS there, we had identified that the way the state programs and federal dollars were structured kind of forced this emergency sheltering at a very expensive rate. And it did not allow the same kind of planned out permanent home provision.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say there is a lot of broken stuff here. And your finger is right on the money there when you're saying you're asking the question about how much we're spending per night. It is hugely exorbitant. Give any one of these families $2,000 a month and they could definitely find at least, more than a hotel room with a hot plate. So it's
So
something to look at.
if you compare that to what the housing allowance for people who are getting social services, it's just ridiculous.
It is ridiculous, and
So-
it's a waste of money, and it is not supportive in the long run. And it probably costs taxpayers more because these families who are living in the motels can't eat right, can't prepare good food. Everybody's stressed out. We know it's going to have long-term health implications. I agree 100%. It's a funding issue coming from state and federal sources, but it's a big problem. And I'm really hoping that Biden-Harris all the way down will start looking at the whole picture rather than program by program. Yeah.
I would just say one last thing is that we're at a crisis now. Building affordable housing is not quick. It is a 5, 6, 7 year with all the rigmarole that has to go through. So we have to have a sense of urgency about it. We have to build a sense of urgency about it. That's it.
Totally with you there. And it might mean that we have to look at alternatives of things we haven't done before.
Right.
So
We have to
Mark,
get outside of the box.
Right.
I just want to jump in because I had another question in the line and I know it's 11 o'clock. Your story about the tent city, the statement you made about the taxing the digital economy and the tent city, that needs to be written down somewhere. We need stories like that to explain to people why the tax changes are so important. And I think stories like this help make it very real for people. So is there a way to get that written?
Yeah, I mean, lots of things to write and do, so I'll consider it. And I have written some things on Facebook and Twitter, but I'll try to put that tax thing, which is a bigger picture. It's really about the victory tax, the wealth tax, antitrust regulation that was brought into effect after World War I. So it's a big issue. I'm happy to write about it. I'm going to be writing some columns going into this campaign year. For everybody who doesn't know, I'm serving in a shortened term of only 2 years. I'm now in the second year of this term and I'm running for office. I'd love to continue to do this job for you for another 4 years. And so I'm going to be coming back to you guys for an endorsement and for your support. You can check out my campaign website at marchforulster.com. And please check out our regular website, comptroller.ulstercountyny.gov. But I really appreciate the chance to come before you today. I'll share all of these links that I've shared today. And Susan, I will take seriously what you're saying. I think you're right. We need to start articulating what we mean by wealth tax. And I don't like the words wealth tax. I mean, I started out my thing on housing by saying some people need to have less and none of those people golf at Wilwick. When we start to say wealth tax, people get very nervous that you're talking about their whatever. And I'm talking about, Amazon, Bezos, Facebook, Zuckerberg. I mean, there are just these unbelievable pools
I
of wealth.
love the way you said it. And I just want to say, I am looking for these messages. We have a separate group that Lynn has started about taking the message and then putting it in a language that resonates, right? We use the wrong words in the Democratic Party, to say our messages, and we have to think about those words. But I think when you start with the story, and I loved the story about after World War II, and now the people that have benefited from the crisis that has happened here in this economy need to be a part of the solution. And we have, and just how you juxtapose that with the tent city because of this problem, right? I think it's a great way to talk about the inequity.
Thank you, March. Thank you so much. Thank you for your
guys.
role on this. And clearly, I think groups like ours, we're not here to create the plans, but we're here to put pressure on the people that we want to really, get moving on this and truly take leadership roles on it. So this is just the beginning. But thanks for kicking off 2021 with us, with this, and we'll certainly have you back and talk
Keep
about,
up your great work, you guys. I miss you all.
we'll miss you too. We'll get together one of these days.
Yes, we
Right.
will. Bye.
Thank you.